Cryx is being led by Wraith Witch Denegra. Her battle group includes a Slayer, Ripjaw, a Stalker, and a Defiler. She also has a Bloat Thrall, Hellslinger Phantom, and a unit of Mechanothralls with 2 Brute Thrall weapon attachments being led by a Scarlock commander. Cryx chose the command cards Power Swell, True Inspiration, Careful Reconnaissance, Hit and Run, and Old Faithful. Circle is being led by Mosar the Desert Walker. His battle group includes a pureblood warpwolf named Remus, a Rotahorn Griffin named Aquila, and a Gorax Rager named Angar. He also has Agata, Queen of Carnage, Lord of the Feast, a Druid Wilder named Aaliyah, a unit of Warpborn Skinwalkers led by Jaha, and his brothers Nico and Thorin. They are being accompanied by a werewolf named Lionel Arthur. Circle chose the command cards Breakthrough, Sentry Duty, Power Swell, Hit and Run, and Infiltration. Circle won the starting role and chose to go second. For terrain layout, we used a random terrain generator found online. A link is below in the description. For scenario, we played a variant called Scenic Steamroller, designed by Thomas and Dessa O'Neill, modified with permission. A link to the variant is in the description below. Rolling a D3, 2 pieces of terrain were chosen to be scored. Jason, playing Circle, chose a stone wall to be scored by solos. Donna, playing Cryx, chose the forest to be scored by warjacks and warbeasts. Cryx was deployed with Hellslinger Phantom on the left and the Bloat Thrall beside him. The core of the battle group was in line with the forest. From left to right was the Slayer, Denegra, Ripjaw, and the Defiler. The Stalker was advanced deployed to the far left, and the Mechanothrall unit was advanced deployed to the far right. Circle was deployed in 2 line formations. On the far left was Remus and Aaliyah. In the center from left to right was Agata, the Skinwalkers, the Warwolf, Mosar, Angar, and Aquila. The Lord of the Feast was advanced deployed ahead of Mosar. Cryx. Turn 1. Raising his fell spear into the air, the Scarlock commander bellowed a guttural command. His horde of thralls rallied, running ahead towards a stone column. A lonely relic, standing in what was once a small town teeming with life. The claws beneath the Bloat Thrall creaked and groaned as they strained to carry its swollen form towards a large boulder. Kane's shadow drifted up ahead of the Stalker, coming to rest by the boulder opposite the Bloat Thrall. Bounding forward like a giant mechanical spider, the Stalker rushed into the clearing ahead of it. The Defiler ran to toe in the edge of the forest, while the Slayer advanced to the other side of the tree line. And Ripjaw moved up beside it. Negra walked up behind Ripjaw, keeping a cautious distance behind her front line. Circle. Turn 1. Aaliyah climbed over a small stone wall and waved the pureblood forward to join her. Though she couldn't see anything in the distance, she perceived a dark presence ahead of them. Remus warped an arcane protection over himself and moved beside her. He spotted what the Druid Wilder could only feel in the atmosphere. A terrifying Cryxian bonejack was bounding toward them. Unleashing a deathly howl, Remus sent a spray of sound waves crashing into the stalker. Aaliyah forced him to boost both to hit and damage, and the stalker was blasted for 5 damage to column 6 at dice +1. The ghastly Lord of the Feast moved to the edge of a stone tower and felt the presence of a horde of undead heading their way. Sending his raven to scout ahead for targets, the Feast Lord was agitated when the bird returned with nothing to report, leaving him perilously alone and exposed. Mosar waved a hand dismissively towards the walking horror, sending several of his beasts to rally around it. Aquila screeched as he soared through the air to face the Cryxian nightmares headed their way. Angar ran to flank the Lord of the Feast, snarling, barely containing the rage that coursed through his veins. For as much as Mosar saw those around him as expendable, he recognized the strategic importance of protecting the Feast Lord from the coming onslaught. Agatha then walked up to secure the second stone wall. Mosar moved to gain a better vantage point and raised Witherhorn towards the sky. Tapping into his bond with Orboros, he caused the ground to open up ahead of Aquila. A massive pillar of salt burst forth from the earth, towering over the Rotterhorn behind it. Continuing his manipulation of the atmosphere around them, the air thinned, causing the sunlight beating down on them to intensify. Lastly, he spoke a hushed word in the direction of the skinwalkers, causing their physical forms to shimmer temporarily as if they were a mirage. With a howl, Jaha and his skinwalkers ran towards a hedge. The werewolf made zoomies, racing up to stay close to his wolf-sworn brethren. Cryx. Turn 2. Denegra granted an allotment of her power to each of her warjacks. Her physical form then faded, and she became wraith-like. Extending her mind to the stalker, she sent the spidery bonejack charging into Remus. As it ran towards the pureblood, the sun's rays hammered down on it, light piercing the stalker's armor for 4 damage to column 6, crippling its left eviscerator. Not to be deterred, the bonejack drove its right eviscerator into the pureblood warpwolf, piercing Remus's left shoulder for 5 damage to spiral 5 at dice -5. The stalker shifted to attack with its damaged left eviscerator, but in its crippled state, it stood no chance. Hellslinger Phantom drifted up to get the skinwalkers in range of his Wraithstorm pistols, and fired an incendiary shot at Thorin. As the round slammed into the skinwalker, his fur erupted in flames, suffering 4 damage at dice -4. Firing a second grievous shot into Thorin, the Hellslinger ended the warrior's life, devastating him with 7 damage at dice -4. The swift hunter then floated closer to get more prey in range as the battle progressed. Putrid slime dripped from the open wounds across the bloat thrall's swollen belly as it steadied itself to aim at Nico. The blast of sludge from its despoiler splashed into the ground at the skinwalker's feet, bathing him in corrosive muck. At dice -9, Nico suffered no immediate damage as the slime scorched his armor. With the pillar of salt stifling their ability to single out the Feast Lord, the Scarlock commander drove the lead brute thrall to advance towards the Rotterhorn. Both brutes and one of the Mechanothralls hopelessly swung their steam fists, but Aquila dodged the attacks easily. The last thrall in range fared better, driving both of his steam fists into Angar's chest for 6 damage to Spiral 5 at dice -2. Lastly, the Scarlock commander unleashed dark fire to bathe Jaha in flames, killing the Skinwalker leader with 8 damage at dice -4. In her ethereal form, the Wraith Witch walked through her warjacks to get closer to the carnage unfolding around them. She struck Eclipse into the ground to send a surge of dark power coursing out around her. As the tendrils of arcane energy washed over her army, several of them were instantly transformed into spectral forms. Next, she raised her hand towards Nico, attempting to damn him with a blighted curse. Despite expending an extra measure of her power, the spell failed to affect the Skinwalker. She then commanded Ripjaw and the Slayer to charge in their ghost-like state through the foliage ahead of them. The sun hammered down on Ripjaw, piercing its armor for 4 damage to column 3, as Mosar's spell was triggered by its movement. Not to be deterred, the Sawmouth Bonejack carved into the lone Skinwalker still struggling with the acid burning at his fur. Boosting the attack, the Ripjaw critically injured Nico, severing his throat. Its bone saw carved into the Skinwalker for 11 damage at straight dice. The Slayer followed suit, charging into the Warwolf with both of its death claws. As the massive Helljack moved towards its prey, Mosar's atmospheric manipulation struck once again. The sun's rays carved into the Slayer for 4 damage to column 2. The Warwolf yelped in pain as the Helljack tore at its flesh. At dice +7, it stood no chance of surviving. Serving to fend off anyone who might try to enter the sacred forest, the Defiler climbed precariously over a fallen log to move deeper into the woods. Circle. Turn 2. Mosar pulled the furious energy from his beasts. Aaliyah's position allowed him to extend his bond with Remus, and the Druid Wilder also assisted the Omnipotent by giving a portion of her own power to maintain the solar-fueled curse he'd cast over the battlefield. The massive salt pillar crumbled, giving Lore the Feast a better view of his prey. His raven spotted a thrall in the distance, croaking loudly to signal to its master. In a flash, the Feast Lord was standing beside his target, swinging Wormblade in a wide arc to catch all the Cryx nearby. The blade slashed across the Mechanothrall's chest for 7 damage at dice +1. As the corpse slumped at his feet, the Lord of the Feast was invigorated by the blood now seeping into the soil. The brute at his side was nearly beheaded when Wormblade gouged at her throat for 11 damage at straight dice. Once more, the strength of his physical being was magnified by the gore. The Feast Lord's attack ended with his blade burying itself into Ripjaw's head. The attack crippled the Bonejack's head and cortex for 7 damage at dice +1. With the massive Helljack slaughtering the Warwolf, Mosar attempted to curse the Slayer, but the spell failed. The Warlock then whispered into the wind, sending a disorienting plague surging out. Instantly, Denegra felt her Warjack's power weakening. Aquila clawed at a Mechanothrall in front of him, tearing at the undead automaton in a boosted attack that did 6 damage at straight dice. The Rotterhorn let loose an ear-piercing shriek that crashed into the Brute Thrall for 2 damage at dice -6. He boosted another claw attack on the same brute, shredding the flesh of her face with 4 damage at dice -2. Mosar tapped into the Gorax's spirit, stirring up a primal rage inside of him, before sending him charging into the Slayer. Angar attempted to claw at the Helljack, but it deflected his first attack with its own massive claws. His second attack found its home, clawing at hoses near the Slayer's hip joint for 7 damage to column 2. Necrotite fumes leaked into the air as the Helljack found its movement system crippled. With the Slayer's ability to defend itself weakened, Agatha rushed in to drive both of her punching blades into its chest, doing 9 damage to column 4 at dice -1. Remus tapped into the warp, feeling every fiber of his body strengthen. Boosting a clawed attack on the Stalker for 12 damage at dice +4, he ripped the Bonejack to pieces. The Pureblood then blasted the Spectral Hellslinger with a boosted attack for 12 damage at dice +1. Aaliyah called out a calming word towards Remus, helping the Warpwolf better manage the ferocity inside him. With the Defiler inside the Sacred Forest, and Agatha in command of the Stone Wall, both sides increased their strategic presence on the battlefield. Cryx. Turn 3. Denegra's body returned to its corporeal form, and she found herself at a loss as her Warjacks failed to power up under the disruptive magic Mosar plagued them with. Relying on an archaic enchantment, she repaired Ripjaw through a single spoken word. With her Bonejack's cortex functioning again, she allocated a significant portion of her power to it, while granting some to the Slayer as well. The Slayer boosted a combined Deathclaw attack on Agatha, killing the Queen of Carnage with 16 damage at dice +5. Using the last of its necrotic blessing to fuel an attack on Angar, the Slayer clawed at him to do 7 damage to Spiral 1 at straight dice, crippling the Gorax's mind. The Wraith Witch urged Ripjaw to boost an attack on Angar, cutting into his right arm for 3 damage to Spiral 1 at dice -6. She commanded it to attack once more, boosting again, this time critically wounding the Gorax with 9 damage to Spiral 2 at dice +2. Mosar reaved the fury unleashed as Angar died. With no targets in its range, Denegra commanded the Bloat Thrall to close the distance with the Circle forces moving towards them. The Scarlock commander drove his thralls forward to better cut off Mosar's front line from getting a clear path to Denegra. The Brute Thrall slammed both of her heavy steam fists into the Feast Lord's skull for 8 damage at dice +1, killing the avatar of the Unsleeping One. A Mechanothrall attempted a futile attack on Aquila, but the Griffin was no easy target. His good fortune would not last, however. The Scarlock commander sent a burst of Darkfire to burn Mosar for 6 damage at dice -2. but the Warlock transferred the pain of his wounds to his Rotterhorn. Aquila suffered the damage to his Spiral 3. After having her Defiler shift its position inside the forest, Denegra moved closer to her Bonejack, preparing for the Circle Warlock's inevitable counterattack. With the stone wall no longer under Agata's control, the Cryxian advantage grew. Circle. Turn 3. After drawing in the energy that had built up within his beast, Mosar finally succeeded in cursing the Helljack, causing its appearance to waver as if it were a walking shadow. The elderly Omnipotent then waved his hand in the Slayer's direction, causing the earth to open below it, sending a blast of frozen air washing over the Slayer. Despite boosting the intensity of the blast, he only managed to do 3 damage to Slayer's Column 1 at dice -3. He then charged into the Helljack, bringing the Blade of Witherthorn down to cleave the massive Warjack in half, with 6 damage to Column 3 at dice -5. Remus warped strength once again, and charged the swollen Bloat Thrall for 12 damage at dice +3. As he clawed at the slobbish Cryxian, the pureblood found himself awash in acidic sludge, being sprayed in the muck pouring out from the bloat's wounds. He then howled a deathly cry towards Ripjaw and the Scarlock commander. Even though Aaliyah forced him to boost the attack on the Bonejack, Remus was shocked to see Ripjaw duck below the barrage. The Scarlock commander was not so nimble, and succumbed to the wall of sound as Remus boosted both to hit and damage. The attack devastated the Thrall commander for 16 damage at dice +2. Mosar forced the Rotterhorn to release a death shriek into the faces of the Thralls harassing him. The Brute Thrall was unharmed at dice -6, but the Mechano Thrall's body was racked in anguish, suffering 3 damage at dice -4. Aquila then batted its wings to come down near Ripjaw while still engaging the Brute. Clawing at the Brute Thrall with a boosted attack, he did 7 damage at dice -2, slaughtering her. As the Thrall fell dead, the Griffin shrieked again, hitting the Bonejack for 1 damage to Column 5 at dice -6. He then clawed into Ripjaw for 8 more damage to Column 1 at dice -2. Aaliyah took up position to control the wall, and each side improved their standing, if only slightly. Cryx. Turn 4. Stepping into the cold darkness, the Wraith Witch became incorporeal once again. Keeping all of her power to herself, Denegra wanted to remove the thorn in her side that was the Elder Blackclad. She commanded the nearly crippled Ripjaw to stumble away from Aquila. Forfeiting any chance it had at a weakened attack on the Griffin, the Bonejack disengaged so that its mistress could now make use of its Arc Node. As it staggered away, Mosar's Sunhammer slammed it for 2 damage to Column 6. Denegra then channeled a venomous spell through Ripjaw. Boosting the hit and damage, the attack bathed the Warlock in acid, burning him for 5 at dice -4. With both of his war beasts at the threshold of how much they could withstand, the Blackclad had to suffer the damage himself. Next, she charged Mosar, boosting once more to hit, and stabbing Eclipse in him for 6 more damage at dice -2. Banishing Mosar into the darkness to see him reappear next to the Griffin. Expending the last of her energy to attack him again, she boosted the attack to hit for 3 damage at dice -2. Hoping to finish off the omnipotent Warlock, the Defiler walked out of the forest and boosted a sludge cannon spray directly into his face, burning his flesh and killing him with 8 damage at dice -4, securing the victory for Lord Taruk.